English translation, 223rd contact. Sunday, 1st May 1988, 0907 hours.
Dear friend, today, I once again have some questions regarding various things, if you have enough time.
There is nothing that would call me back urgently. So therefore bring forward your questions.
You, as well as Ptah and Simyase, once played the strange humming sounds of the earth to me through your apparatuses, which I cannot perceive in nature. Unfortunately, because my hearing senses are not so sensitive that I could hear these sounds, which should very well be possible for other people, however, as you have explained. The sources of these sounds are very diverse, as your cognition yields, and these or similar sounds should, according to your information, also appear on other worlds as well as on asteroids, comets, meteors, suns, and dark clouds, as well as with cosmic nebulae and even in every black hole, etc., so not only on the Earth. All electromagnetic waves, as well as the northern lights and solar winds, etc., belong to these sound sources. You named the sounds Symphony of the Earth, or Symphony of the Planets, as well as Symphony of Space, which is also entirely incorporated into these sounds. Like also the atmospheres of planets and suns, and even all material and immaterial things of every kind, concerning which you have spoken of a symphony of the spheres. This symphony, that is to say these sounds, are, so far, still unknown to the earthly scientists in particular, and to the people in general, other than just the exceptions to the rule, even those people who perceive these humming sounds. That is to say, symphony of the earth, and who are of the opinion that something is not right in their heads, and thus, not that real things are going to and fro. Can you once again officially explain what it actually concerns with these humming sounds, if it should not remain a secret?
It does not have to remain a secret because in about 10 to 15 years, a portion of the earthly sciences should also encounter these things. Moreover, it concerns the fact that every planet, every comet, every larger asteroid, meteor, and every sun, as well as the nebulae and clouds in space and space itself, as well as every black hole and all material and immaterial things existing at all produce certain tones and sounds, which we, as you said, actually call symphony. Within the entire realm of the creation or of the universe, nothing exists that would not be incorporated into these symphonies. So therefore, all material and immaterial things generate certain tones and sounds and even symphonies in a swinging wave-based form, which usually cannot be perceived by the human ear because these move in too low or too high frequencies for this. Only through abnormal, degenerative, physiological changes can these sounds or symphonies be perceived by human life forms, whereby these then become effective in an extremely consciousness-impairing, nerve-wracking, and psyche-damaging manner. The frequencies of these symphonies or sounds reach into all levels, so thus, the lowest sounds, like humming sounds, as you say, are given as well as the highest whirring sounds and shimmering sounds, etc. As the frequencies are virtually countless in their number, these are also the sources of the sound symphonies, for these relate to all that exists of the material and immaterial. Thus, if one starts from the earth, then these sound sources are, for example, the waters, in terms of the deep sea movements, as well as the movements of the waters of the lakes, rivers, streams, creeks, and springs. Even the roar of the waves, the small and mighty storms, the tectonic movements of the Earth's interior, the bubbling of magma in the earth, and the eruptions of the volcanoes belong to these, as well as the rain, hail, and the various layers of the atmosphere, which rub against each other, as well as the winds against the trees, grasses, flowers, houses, mountains, sand dunes and deserts, steppes, icebergs, glaciers and surfaces of ice, as well as against windmills, wind turbines, ships, aircraft, rockets, missiles, and vehicles of all types, against land surfaces and everything else that materially exists. Also to be noted are the voices and sounds of humans and animals, insects, birds, and fish, and any other water creatures. All sounds together form the actual symphony of the planet, as we call it. And as this happens in the purely material realm, so this also happens in any immaterial sphere in the entire universe, each of which also produces its own symphony, like also fog flowing on the Earth or nebulae existing in space and all other formations that are absolutely impossible to cite in their number because everything is so immeasurable that it could neither be grasped by purely human understanding nor by technological possibilities of any kind.
Thanks. And since we are already at it, I would like to come to speak again on the black hole of our Milky Way, of which we spoke, if I remember correctly, on the 30th of May, 1987. By its attractive force, we do not simply fly with our SOL system uncontrollably out into space, but rather are somehow still held within the Milky Way. There are, indeed, black holes in every galaxy, as you explained, which Simya Se and Ptah already said. But in addition to these, there are still the black wanderers, as you call those kinds of black holes that drift through the cosmos. Ptah also said that in this regard, there would be two types. Precisely the black holes that drift wildly through the universe, and then the others that are galaxy-bound and, thus, draw a certain course in or through a galaxy and its surroundings. And all black holes have an attractive force that depends on size, and that reaches up to hundreds or even millions of light-years away. And here, I would now like to ask if also with or in our galaxy, such a wandering black hole exists. A galaxy-wandering black hole, so to speak, if I may name this thing in such a manner.
That is a good designation, which I will include in my vocabulary. Yes, there actually is such a black wanderer or wandering black hole in the realm of your galaxy. Nevertheless, it is a smaller structure than what the actual central black hole of the Milky Way is. But still, it is very remarkable and draws an extensive course through the galaxy, and to be sure, at around 6,400 light-years of distance from the actual center of the Milky Way. In addition to this black wanderer, there are still some other wandering black holes in the nearer and further surroundings of the galaxy, one of which from time to time also exerts a determining influence on the planet Venus of the SOL system.
I understand. Then something else. Do you know to what religious persuasion Emmanuel's parents, Mary and Joseph, belonged, what this was, and from where the two actually came? Were they actually Nazarenes? A pastor who is very partial to my contacts with you asked me whether you would know anything about this. Unfortunately, I have never attended to these interests myself, and thus have not tried to find out something.
The facts about Mary and Joseph are very well known to me, which you know very well, so I do not understand why you present yourself as ignorant in this respect.
I naturally know about your knowledge of the matter. The dumb question is whether you would know the answer. I simply slipped unintentionally. Excuse me, please.
I understand. To answer the first part of your question, Mary and Joseph did not belong to any religious persuasion. They were natives of Tiberias, a place located at the Sea of Galilee at that time. Mary was the daughter of a merchant family from Tiberias, and Joseph was the son of a shipbuilder and carpenter's family, which was also located in Tiberias. And if you still want to have information about the two families, then I can say that Mary had 3 brothers and 4 sisters, and Joseph had 3 brothers and 2 sisters. At the time of Emmanuel's birth, all siblings and parents of Mary and Joseph were still alive. What is still to be said, but which should also be well known to you, Joseph was not the biological father, but rather the foster father of Emmanuel. The biological father was the extraterrestrial Gabriel.
Yes, I know the history relating to this. Well, I once again have a question about the greenhouse effect on Earth, about which we have already spoken several times. In this connection, you said that the glaciers will melt rapidly all over the world. But what about the so-called perpetual snow on the high mountains here in Switzerland, on the Himalayas, and on all high mountains of the world in general?
The age-old snow and ice fields of all mountains will also be affected by the great melting process. So even the Himalayas, with which you surely also mean Mount Everest, whose masses of ice and snow will have melted away approximately by the year 2030, if the warming process still rises further. As I already explained at an earlier date, however, two factors are involved in this process approximately equally. On the one hand, the Earth human being, with their senseless destruction of the environment, etc., and, on the other hand, the normal processes of nature, through which periodic, planet-wide climate changes are caused, which are acute in the present and near future time, and will further spread.
So just the human being alone does not cause the changes, even though certain know-it-alls, devil-in-the-wall painters, and certain sectarians, etc., gladly impute the fault solely to the earthlings. This is clear, but there are always people who maintain some nonsense, like the man who was recently with me, and who wanted to fool me into believing that if one could travel through the universe at very high speed, then visually the stars would stretch in length like luminous strips. It was not possible for me to make it clear to him that this is not the case, and that I myself had experienced, on the great journey, that the stars retain their form, and that even all target stars center themselves in the central visual field in a bluish color when one flies toward them at great and even faster than light speed, while the distant stars located at the edge of the field of view are practically preserved in such a manner as they present themselves in the normal viewing form.
You should be lenient towards these people, for on the one hand, they cannot understand these things yet, and cannot grasp them because they lack the necessary knowledge for this. And on the other hand, they also could not gain appropriate experiences like you did through an authoritative experience.
With which you are indeed right. But I still do not understand that such people can just stubbornly persist in their stupid or even false assumption-based assertions, without taking into consideration or reflecting upon any other explanations, etc. But now, something else. Dr. Gross, whom I have known since my youth, and who always gave me the necessary medications that I took on my travels in the Near and Middle East, has asked me, since he knows about my contacts with you, what can be done about impotence in men in order to remedy this. In addition, everything connected to the realization of the increasingly appearing impotence would also interest him. As a doctor, you can surely tell me a few things about this, right?
The increasingly appearing impotence in terrestrial man, as a rule, traces back to his own misconduct, which is based on the fact that one sits for too long with clothes, that is to say, laid together legs on chairs or in vehicles and flying apparatuses or on bicycles and motorcycles, etc. Also too tight underwear and overlinens, by which I mean trousers, contribute to impotence, and to be sure, by sitting for too long with folded or crossed legs, as well as by sitting on saddles and cushions of vehicles and on all kinds of other seats, the testicles of men are heated in such a manner that it very harmfully affects the stability and vitality of the sperm cells, which are impaired by the too great heat to such an extent that they die off. Also, much too warm baths and too hot showers contribute in this wise to impotence in men. Nevertheless, a remedial action can be taken against this, namely by the seats being shaped in such a manner that the testicles lie freely between two seat parts and not on a firm surface, but it must also be ensured that not too tight, but rather no or only very airy underwear are worn, as well as large and airy trousers through which no accumulation of heat arises at and around the testicles, which would warm up the testicles and the sperm cells. Through the aforementioned form of sitting and through the warmth, the testicles can no longer cool themselves. Consequently, the blood in these, which should ensure a cooling through its circulation, stops itself. Testicles and sperm cells do not need great heat, but on the contrary, a certain coolness, for only in such can the sperm cells thrive in a fruitful form. If, however, a partial or extensive impotence has already appeared as a result of too great a heating of the testicles, then there is still the possibility that this can be reversed in full or in part in many cases, namely by a permanent cooling of the testicles being carried out. This can occur, for example, through a special cooling belt. This is a skin-compatible abdominal belt, on which two cooling elements are mounted, which become gently pressed against the groin to the left and right of the testicles through an appropriate underwear leg garment.
Since we are already talking about these things, can you still tell me what natural means which are freely available to everyone, such as berries, algae, grain, herbs, spices, fruits, or vegetables, are the most effective against heart attacks?
There are several of these. What can be brought to application most suitably is garlic, which contains very many antioxidants, like also apples, which, like garlic, are extremely healthy, whose antioxidants cause a slowdown of that cholesterol which can lead to a hardening of the arteries.
Uh-huh. And what about saccharin, which was widely used during World War II as a sugar substitute? And what about the sweeteners that are used nowadays, like also the cyclamate, or whatever that stuff is called? Can I use this to reduce my increased weight, and even take such sweeteners instead of sugar?
You should avoid that because sweeteners of various natural and chemical kinds, especially in the form of cyclamate, are partially very detrimental to health and usually cause exactly the opposite, namely, that they promote weight gain through increased appetite. Moreover, they are extremely unhealthy, as I already said. The body actually takes in many different sweetening substances, and particularly cyclamate, and thereby damages, as I said, one's well-being of health and one's immune system. And indeed, especially in those people whose intestinal functions are such that they even convert the sweetener in the form of cyclamate into cyclohexylamine, a poison that, in greater quantities, leads to high blood pressure and, thus, can become life-threatening. And in fact, many people also die from it, without the physicians being able to recognize the actual reason for the cause of death, due to the lack of knowledge of the harmfulness of cyclamate. Furthermore, cyclamate also causes damage to the sperm cells, as well as to the testicles of men, by what means impotence can arise. Even in women, damage can occur through sweeteners, and especially through cyclamate, through which infertility results. Moreover, sweeteners of the form cyclamate can produce a carcinogenic effect in men and women, as well as in animals.
And what then should those people do, who suffer from diabetes, who can no longer eat anything sweet if that is so?
There are completely natural and healthy sweeteners of plants, berries, fruits, and vegetables, which are safe for diabetics. But it must be ensured that they actually are harmless, because some herbal sweeteners are also more or less harmful to health and the general well-being, as well as to the immune system.
One would have to know these plants, etc.
They are well known, therefore, they do not have to be mentioned specifically.
Once again, Then once again, I want to return to what some people claim in reference to a second and third moon of the Earth. Te and Simyase showed me the nearer and further surroundings of the Earth, but I saw nothing of another moon. The two of them only let me see one other planet, but this always only remains on the far side of the sun and cannot be seen from the Earth. Do you know why such claims about other moons are continuously made? This also applies to other planets that should be located behind Pluto or so, whereby the planet behind the sun is not meant.
You speak of the planet Cathine, which will drift away from the Sol system in the near future and hurry away into space. But now, what concerns the alleged other moons of Earth, these actually do not exist. In the future time, however, at further distances that are to be calculated in several or even many millions of kilometers, new objects will certainly be discovered by earthly astronomers and amateur astronomers, which will then probably also be designated as other moons, which they truly are not, however. With these objects, it will actually concern larger asteroids and meteors, which have several kilometers or even tens, hundreds, or thousands of kilometers in diameter to show. The same is valid for objects, for other, further planets, which orbit outside of Pluto's orbit in the great belt of broken objects around the SOL system, and which will also be discovered one by one in the coming time by the Earth humans.
Thanks for the information, which should really make everything clear. But say once, if I may come to speak again on the American warmongering President Bush Jr., of whom you have, indeed, told a few things, if his father's work will continue in Iraq, who will also be a warmonger and who will let loose the so-called Gulf War from the pile in January of 1991, which then ends in such a manner that Saddam Hussein can perform more mischief.
Fortunately, this one will actually only go through one term of office, as you said.
For my part, I find it simply outrageous that wars are fought at all, just because crazy, psychopathic, and schizophrenic and, moreover, cowardly and power-hungry people, like certain presidents and dictators, etc., can display their power unhindered and can release their bloodthirsty minions on the peoples or even on the whole of humanity through sheer terrorism and murder. Not just those who act in personal, political, or religious and sectarian, blind fanaticism and in lusts for revenge are to be designated as pure, blinded, criminal, and irresponsible packs of criminals and as terrorists, but also all legally elected heads of state, or those elected through fraud or through coercion and gavolt, being isurnosais, as well as all those who obey their commands in the way that they themselves aus arten, to get very badly out of control of the good human nature, and become unscrupulous, emotionless and irresponsible, bloodthirsty and murderous monsters and even actual terrorists. And finally, it must be said that those in power, and indeed, especially those of the industrial nations, also instigate wars and, therefore, expand for years, in order to create work and high-value money in their own country, namely by the fact that because of the warfare in foreign countries, the entire industry in their own country, which works for weapons and weapon systems and their related branches, receives horrendous orders, and thus, unemployment is also prevented through this, as well as the sinking of the cash value, etc. And now, when the Bushes let loose various wars from the pile in the coming time, like in Iraq and in Afghanistan, etc., as you explained, and all this is carried out under the guise of counterterrorism, retribution, and for freedom, peace, and national security, then the maintenance of the arms industry and all that goes with it is also behind everything.
Your words can express the truth very well, and in them, the horror that is contained in everything is also visible. But to your question, the warmongering President Bush, as you admirably call him, will bring in his time, as I already explained in previous conversations, very much sorrow, death, and disaster upon the human beings of the earth. Not only will he follow in the footsteps of his father, who is soon coming to power for one term of office, but he will still take this a lot further, whereby we have not yet fathomed, however, all the events and consequences of his psychopathic and domineering power obsession and vindictiveness. But unfortunately, the evils, the destructions, the bloodshed and the murders through wars and other terrors arranged by him will be many. Concerning a second war in Iraq, however, the facts indicate that such an event could arise in the year 2003. But in this respect, we still have not gained any determining insights, because for the time being, everything is solely based on probability calculations. But these have yielded a high value towards the fact that the war could actually take place, if the rest of the world will not be filled with enough reason to stop the terrorist crimes of the vindictive and human-despising as well as human rights-despising and irresponsible presidents at the given time.
Unfortunately, maniacs never die out. However, this is probably not just the case on Earth, but also on other worlds. But Earth certainly has to have especially major maniacs. But let's speak of something else. A question was given to me, which you can surely also answer for me, without violating a secrecy order that you might have to note. The climate changes on Mars of which Ptah has told me, to what origin do these trace back?
On the one hand, the orbit around the Sun plays a decisive role, but on the other hand, there is also a striking correlation in terms of the astronomical behavior as well as the enormous polar ice caps.
Concerning which, our dear scientists still maintain that these do not exist. But now, a question in reference to teeth. How is it actually, with you, when teeth are damaged or are no longer available? And what about dental care and dental hygiene of a personal form?
We maintain our teeth by sound waves, as this is known to you from your own practical knowledge and your own experience, which is why it seems illogical to me that you ask your question. Evidently, another reason behind this is to be sought than just your interest.
Now, once from my side, even as Simyase sometimes took it from you. That is of correctness, for I was asked if you could not give an official answer.
I understand. Thus, I have answered the one question for you, while the following has to be said to the others. Our teeth, as well as dental care and dental hygiene, are such that the first teeth, which to my knowledge you call milk teeth, independently cease their functions and fall out, like with the Earth humans. The second renewable teeth are preserved in the best possible way through authoritative cleaning and through healthy and vigorous care. If these become damaged for some reason, which is extremely rare, then the corresponding teeth are removed in a completely painless manner, after which they grow again independently, which traces back to a genetically engineered process that is given through heredity. Repairing defective teeth is not recommended, because often through the materials used for this, more harm than good results, as this is the case with the Earth person, who still uses repair technology that is extremely insufficient, which is why in this respect, among other things, also the need for genetic research exists, which will become a major talking point in the coming time, mainly through the irrational ones who will turn against genetic research and against the application of gene technology in many ways. Nevertheless, as irresponsible as their relevant actions will be against the important and indispensable genetic progress, they will not be able to think about this in their short-sightedness.
Then a question in reference to sexual love, which is always confused with real love. How do the causes for this arise?
Sexual love. This is evoked body chemically by neurotransmitters such as dopamine and oxytocin, whereby the thoughts are of determining importance, because through these, in a conscious form, the desires are driven into higher or lower forms, which means that sexuality can be controlled by reason and intellect. And indeed, sexual love has nothing to do with true love, which is purely determined by the mind, and which cannot even be equated with the feeling of love, which is also often absent in the case of purely sexual love.
and rapists, as well as other sex offenders, like also pedophiles and other child abusers. What is the reason for their inhumane actions and behavior?
Either they are pathologically predisposed in this regard, or they can just act unrestrainedly in terms of their desires without exercising reasonable control over these.
And can those who are pathologically predisposed be healed?
This possibility very well exists, but the Earth human is hardly in a position to do this because it must be accomplished through specific interventions in the brain or in a genetic-related form if the illness is strong in its nature. As a rule, psychiatric measures are not useful. Rather, they lead to relapses because those stricken by the illness deliberately act as though they are cured just to succumb, then, to their uncontrollable urges again. Pure medicinal treatments are also very doubtful, for as soon as the effects of the thought-restraining and desire-restraining substances subside, when the medicines are no longer taken regularly, or when they become discontinued, then the desires break through again, uninhibitedly and uncontrollably.
However, all that is not taken into account by the human beings of the earth, especially not by the psychiatrists and psychologists of the fallible ones, who decide on this. They always believe, the better the delinquents can act, that these would be cured and could be set free again or be released from prison on vacation, after which new atrocities then arise from those who are released. But all these responsible persons want to know everything better in their megalomania, and beat all advice into the wind. What shall remain to be done when their answer to everything is wanting to know better than others?
That is of correctness.
Then I still have one last question for today, after which we can turn to the private matters. Do you know what predatory animal was ever the largest on Earth? So by this, I mean throughout all times up to the actual primeval times, when the first creatures lived on the Earth, in the air, or in the water.
The largest predatory being of all times lived in the original seas. A being that, when full grown, was up to 32 meters long, weighed up to 185 tons, and had fins up to 7 meters in length. Nevertheless, the average of these enormous creatures was about 25 meters, with a fin length of 3 to 4 meters and a weight of approximately 150 tons. In the future time, indications for this being will be found on Earth by the paleontologists, etc., after which it will then be named Liopleurodon, as I know from a look into the future.
Then the predatory dinosaur, Titanosaurus rex, or Giganotosaurus rex, was only the largest predator on the mainland.
That is of correctness.
With that, I have asked all questions. So let us turn to the private matters.